Hello everyone and welcome to Avantika Designeering series or ADS as we like to call it. Every week on Wednesday, we feature design and technology leaders who share their professional journey, their thoughts on their domain of work, and designeering where the world of design and engineering meet. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, let's continue with your show.
Every organization should have an actively built culture as it provides the organization with an identity. A culture built on design thinking principles can cultivate efficiency and create an environment of creativity and innovation. It helps us understand human behavior and consumer needs. But how can the cultural designer use design thinking to enhance the efficiency of an organization? To understand the concept of design thinking and the importance of culture in an organization, in this episode, we interact with Parameswaran Venkataraman, Chief Design Officer at Fractal Analytics. He has over 2 decades of experience in design and leadership roles in various companies like Ideo, Dr. Reddy's, Kantar, G Healthcare, and Sapient Corporation. Parameswaran holds expertise in interaction design, user experience design, design strategy, and he's also been an entrepreneur. And that's why on our journey of discovering designeering, we talked to him about unveiling culture design. Hello, Param. Welcome to Avantika Designeering series. We're really excited to host you on our show today.
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you for inviting me. And really looking forward to this conversation. It's been pending for a while, so happy that we are able to find the time. Thank you.
Superb. So to start, our conversation and starting with an icebreaker, we came across your article regarding how do you become a culture designer. The question that I have for you, Param, is who is a culture designer, and can you elaborate on the same?
Sure. The interesting thing is I don't even remember this article, but I think the idea of a culture designer is for me anyone in the organization, right? It could be someone who's a CEO, it could be someone leading a department, it could be someone who's part of the team as well. It is anyone who's contributing to the role of to the experience of employees, right? To the experience of anyone in the team. That I think, yeah, that to me sums up the nature of the role.
Interesting. So we are mainly talking about how we could have a designer's approach in terms of laying the culture and execution of the culture in an organization, so that all the people collectively in the ecosystem can thrive.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think the idea is that organizations have realized that more than anything else, it's not the products, it's not the services, it's not the business model. I mean, the business model, all these things contribute, of course, but I think what is truly differentiating for any company and hard to replicate in other companies is culture. And so when that, so that most companies have started realizing this, and therefore there is a there is a conscious attempt to create a culture and curate it. One is curating it, creating it, the other is maintaining it. And so it's not easy to maintain it, and that's the part where you need to put in some conscious effort, and it's not easy, and it can often die down. It can, you have to revitalize it, you have to keep nurturing it, and that's why there are different roles that people have to play in creating and curating that culture and maintaining it.
Absolutely, well said. I think culture is an absolutely important and integral part of having a great organization out there, and I believe that everything revolves around it, and companies with great culture are definitely successful. In fact, Param, moving from the culture aspect and the article that you wrote to your journey, now, you have been in design and innovation leadership roles across companies like IDEO, Dr. Reddy's, Kantar, GE Healthcare, and Sapient Corporation. What we would like to know is, can you share with us your journey and how meaningful it has been over a period of time?
Sure. I think the journey has been fairly, organic. I don't think I had any specific plan or, I mean, there were certain points in time when there were certain ideas that I had that, okay, this is the next thing that I'd like to do. But for the most part, it has been organic and evolving. So the journey, I think, started, when I studied visual communication for my undergraduate program. And I mean, that's where I got the some basic foundations of design and started learning the basic elements of design. Got exposed to a variety of different communication sort of medium, whether it's graphic design, whether it's photography, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's any of these different worlds. And through the end of my undergraduate, I decided that I wanted to get into interaction design, because the internet had just come to India at that time, and I was playing around with this medium, and the whole idea of human computer interaction was very interesting. And that's how this whole thing began. Um, the those were early days. I mean, there was interaction design as a concept was even not just in India but around the world. It was just emerging. This is I'm talking about the mid 90s. Um, and then I got my job serendipitously at a company in Bangalore, which was just starting at that time, and one of the early pioneers in what was called at that time later internet consulting. So there were these internet consulting firms that were just starting around that time, and I happened to join them as the first designer that they hired. It's a company called PlanetAsia.com in Bangalore, and those are very early days in Bangalore, and those who are familiar with Bangalore will know that in '97 Bangalore was a pristine little. It's almost like a retirement town, and it's very very small little city and very intimate, and the culture there was very interesting. And a lot of startups happened at that time as well. So anyway, from there on, I worked as an interaction designer, did a lot of interesting things. All there was nothing, nowhere to learn from. You had to learn it on your own, and it was fairly groping in the dark and figuring it out as we went. But yeah, it was fun. One of my early projects that I did at that time, which I look back on, was we did a project for a startup based in the Bay Area, in the US. And so me and the software engineer, we both flew down there, and we worked with the startup for about 4 months in the Bay Area. And the startup was a bunch of basically two graduates from Harvard Business School who had just graduated, and they'd got some seed funding, and they wanted to put together a working prototype which they could take to for their investors, and get the next round of funding. So it was just the four of us, these two co-founders, me and this colleague of mine who was a software engineer. And it was super interesting to work directly with these founders for 4 months, and create a working prototype, a product, which is basically an online e-commerce engine to help with consumers with shopping and all that. So anyway, so that was 99, way back in the early in the dot-com days, in the heady dot-com days. So I saw the Bay Area in its full energy and gusto for the dot-com time. Anyway, long story short, let me kind of cut from there to from there on. My journey went on to discovering companies like Ideo and human-centered design and design thinking in the early 2000s, and I got fascinated with that. I remember even reading a blog by Jan Chipchase, who was one of the early, who was actually like a celebrity design ethnographer, or design researcher, or whatever you want to call it. And I found that whole idea of understanding how people behave and understanding how human behavior is a foundation to design. And I think that whole sort of idea was fascinating, and I felt that is calling me. And this whole so that's when I decided to sort of get into design ethnography and the more sort of broader realm of human centered design. And unfortunately, again, there was not many places to study all this formally at that time, and not not too many people who could teach me this stuff as well, unfortunately. But I had to figure it out on my own. And yeah, so anyway, I start, learned, tried a lot of things on my own, tried whatever I could in the work that I did. Excuse me. And so I was working at GE Healthcare, where I was part of a team that was looking at products and technologies, 5 to 10 years out, in the healthcare domain. And um, and that's when I spent a lot of time in hospitals and medical environments, trying to understand how do doctors and nurses behave, and what do they do in their hospitals, and how does software and technology help them. And that was kind of I really got convinced that this approach to design was, or for that matter, innovation was the right approach. Being very human centered, being grounded in end users' needs, and looking at that sort of idea. From there on, I started my own company in Bangalore. I was very young and I was quite naive, I think, looking back in hindsight. I was quite, I had this audacious sort of idea that I wanted to start like an Ideo kind of firm in India, because I felt that India needed design thinking and design centered innovation. And there was nothing in that time. Idea of course, I had not yet started in India, and I felt that I wanted to start something like that. And as I said, I was quite young and naive, and it was a 2 year journey. And I would say I call myself a been there, didn't do that entrepreneur, because I gloriously failed. But I had a lot of learnings in that process, and did some interesting stuff. But yeah, it was a business failure, to to put it mildly. And after that, I came back to a job which I realized I'm actually much better as an entrepreneur inside a company rather than a entrepreneur on my own. Anyway, so I think the vision that I had with starting my own company, I realized that I was able to fulfill that much better when I moved on to Kantar. Kantar is, of course, a large group of companies within WPP, and IMRB is one of the largest market research firms within Kantar. So I started a design thinking practice for IMRB in 2009, and got a great opportunity to set that up from scratch. And it was essentially, I was able to do what I wanted to do with my own company, but I was able to get paid for it. And of course, I had fantastic access to big companies and clients that Kantar and IMRB had. So whether it was Pepsi or in India, large companies like Godrej and ITC and so on. So yeah, I ran that for about 4 years or so, and I was having a lot of fun. Did a lot of work in the area of product innovation, new business, new opportunities, looking at consumer needs 5 to 10 years from now. Companies like Intel and so on. So Alcatel, these are all companies that we worked with, and I was having a lot of fun. And then out of the blue, I got this call from Ideo. And Ideo had just started in India a little before that time, and they were looking to expand the leadership team. And they reached out to me, and I started talking. And of course, Ideo was a dream job for me from the early 2000s, and it was hard to turn that down. And so, I came on board in Ideo, and in 2013, and we were looking to expand the India office at that time, and establish the India studio. And Dr. Reddy's was one of the first clients that I got to work with. And the journey with Dr. Reddy's was interesting. That with Ideo and Dr. Reddy's, Ideo started working with Dr. Reddy's to help them, right from the first project. The whole idea was to help them look at what is the reason for the organization's existence, redefining the organization purpose. And that was a very pivotal project which laid the foundation for a long journey of transformation. And the culmination of that project was helping them restate their purpose, and that was articulated as good health can't wait. And that started a whole journey of saying, okay, how do we now live good health can't wait through various touch points in the organizations in the organization, and how do you make that tangible for consumers, for patients, for employees, for partners, and so on. And so that was a long journey of taking design into every different part of the organization through the design thinking process. And so during my time at IDEO, I spent a lot of time working with Dr. Reddy's, and both Dr. Reddy's and I got a sense of how this might work. Incidentally, about a year and a half after that, IDEO decided to wind down in India, and of course, I had an offer to move to the Bay Area to IDEO. They were setting up a new studio at that time around transformation of organizations, and I had the good fortune to be offered to join there. But at the same time, the CEO of Dr. Reddy's reached out and said that he wanted to start an innovation lab within the company, and wanted someone like me to spearhead that. So I took the latter and stayed back in India, and continued that, set up that from scratch. We eventually ended up calling it Studio 5B. And yeah, so we started that from scratch into 2014, in to begin with in Hyderabad, and then a little bit later after that in Bombay. Set up a studio, and ran that for 5 years, and did a lot of interesting work in the area of healthcare and patient centricity, and also in helping Dr. Reddy's, a large $2 billion company, 35, 40 years old, helping them reinvent themselves and trying to look at new business models, new opportunities outside the core. And then in 2019, I moved to Fractal, where I'm currently working. And here, my mandate is to lead the design team, where we are looking at how does the intersection of design, behavioral sciences, data science, AI, and all this come together. And so that's part of my mandate now. And it's interesting looking at how does design get reinvented in a post AI world. So that's the long and long story, Rohit, to answer your question.
Hey, did you know? Founded in the year 2000, Fractal Analytics is a strategic analytics partner to the most admired Fortune 500 companies globally and helps them power every human decision in the enterprise. Fractal has more than 1,200 consultants spread across 15 global locations, including the United States, United Kingdom, and India. Wow, all of this sounds really very exciting, Param, and I'm sure that it's been meaningful all the way long. In fact, while you spoke about Fractal, congratulations on Fractal being rated in the top 100 best working places for women in 2020. What we would love to know, Param, from you is how does a working day in Fractal Analytics looks like, especially from a designer's perspective?
Yeah, I think the work that we're doing here in Fractal, the team is about, we have a design team of about 30-35 people now. We have people who are spread across different skills and specializations, from user research to behavioral science to information design, interaction design, UX design, and so on. And the work that we're doing is essentially focused on bringing design into the world of analytics and artificial intelligence. And what it looks like on the ground is, working with large clients. Most of the clients in Fractal are based in the US, or some in UK or in Australia. And these are Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies. Fairly large sort of transformative questions around how do you bring AI and analytics into the organization. So, for example, working with a large consumer goods company in Europe, looking at how does analytics or big data help in AI help in transforming the way they manage their warehouses across Europe, in all their warehouses. And so, how can they start making better decisions inside the warehouse, and manage the inventory and manage the supply chain and make it a lot more efficient, and of course uh, become faster and become more agile in the process, right? So I think the average day is, there's a bunch of, it could be, if the project is in the early stages of setting up, then it could look like, helping in planning research and understanding the end users and unmet needs, and doing a lot of what we call discovery and exploratory research around understanding the end users and how they go about what they're doing today, understanding their context and behaviors. So that there could be a lot of that kind of work. um, if the project is more downstream in the process, then it could look like, translating those behavioral insights, and once you've identified some interesting unmet needs, or the underlying reasons why people are doing what they're doing, in from a behavioral science standpoint, getting to the explainability of what people are doing and why they're doing it, then translating that into a solution design, right? Whether it's so reimagining how the customer or the end users would use AI, and how would that reimagine their business, or their workflows and their processes, and prototyping that, and iterating that and testing that. So it could look like any of these things. I think that's the core part of the work, and of course there's a lot of other things, like, a lot of our time also goes into trying to think about how do we evangelize the role of design in the organization, because setting up a design behavioral science design competency in an analytics AI organization is not something that's been done too many times before. So we are really exploring that, and discovering that as we speak, and so there's a lot of inquiry within the organization, and trying to think about how do we democratize design across the company, so that when design is required, you don't have to necessarily come to a department like us. And so how do you spread that across the organization? I think the mindset the whole idea, that approach that we're taking here, is design is not a department, it's a mindset. As someone, I don't remember who said this, but this statement is stuck in my head, and I thought that's very relevant to what we're trying to do here.
Wow, sounds really exciting, Param, especially in the last couple of years. We've heard about fractal growing. We've seen the usage and impact of AI at workplaces. And at the same time, the entire design lens and the focus, which is very systematically growing in India. So this sounds really very exciting and cool, if I would use the word. Sounds really, really interesting. So, moving from fractal to the world of design, Param, design is transforming the way leading companies to create value. And great design has that wow factor that makes products more desirable and appealing to users. My question is, how could design thinking be used at the core of effective strategy development to create advances in both innovation and efficiency?
Yeah, I think that question, I don't think there's one single answer to that question, but I think what I've learned over time is that design, or design thinking, is at the heart of it, it's about empathy and creativity. If you think about these two qualities of unique qualities of design thinking, how do you apply this to any problem that is being solved in a company, right? So you can apply that to a problem which could be around, why is my business stagnating in certain part of my business, in some products and some categories are stagnating, and how do you revitalize that? You could apply it from that perspective, and use empathy and creativity to solve that problem. Or you could apply it to a question which is much broader around, where does my organization go in terms of a completely new business or a new opportunity beyond what I do today, right? And that could be, it could be applied in that context, or it could be applied in the context of, how do you help the organization connect with its employees better, and how do you build a unique and a sustainable culture. And so, or for that matter, how do you rethink performance management in the organization with employees and so on? So I think at the heart of it, like I said, it's about empathy and creativity. I think that's the fundamental principles which are unique and which really bring the value of design.
That's an interesting perspective. In fact, while solving a problem, Param, it is essential to get the high level flow of design, establishing a skeleton around which we can build our design. What I'm curious about, Param, here is how can designers build a bridge between the research phase and the design phase? Something that you also mentioned in your experience that you've done both of these things. So how do you bridge that gap?
Look, to my mind, I think, like you said, there I've done both of these things. I don't see them as both as two separate things. To me, design, as it should be practiced, should start from understanding human behavior, right? And so that's the foundation, and then from there, reframing the problem and reframing how you think about that problem that you're trying to solve, by now having understood that human behavior and understanding why people are doing what they're doing and what do they need actually underlying that, and that automatically becomes the bridge to solution design, right? So to my mind, these are, yes, they are distinct elements of the design process, but they are one seamless, it's a seamless journey, as I see it. And so I think the way to bridge it is, look, I think a lot of it depends on the process. If you set up a process where you institutionalize design and the design process, so that it follows these distinct steps, right from the beginning, whether it's about framing the problem, then empathy, then understanding why people are doing what they're doing and the behavior, and you know codifying those behaviors and translating that into insights, and getting to the why, and then reframing, and then identifying opportunities and ideas and new ways of solving that problem, and then prototyping and so on, right? I mean, it's a classic design thinking process, but if you establish that process, and then the second part is, set up the team in the right way, right? If you have people who are specializing in each of these different aspects that you need in solving that problem, you need to have a person who's focusing on user research, or behavioral science or design research. You need to have a person with certain amount of business design skills. You need to have someone who has the right skills in, let's say, interaction design, or allied sort of subjects, or you need to have people with industrial design skills. So it depends on what the problem that you're trying to solve is, but the team constitution changes based on that. But at the heart of it, it's about having people with two or three different skills that are relevant to that project, and to the process, and then being able to establish that and then work through that. All these three, four people at the core need to be there from end to end, from the beginning till the end. It's not like a researcher does research and then translates it and throws it over a wall to a designer, and then the designer designs in vacuum. It's not, it doesn't work like that. Every person needs to be there from the beginning and pretty much till the end, and then you're going through the entire design process through that experience of this core team.
That's interesting. In fact, Param, I'll take a cue from something that you mentioned earlier also. And for any business to be successful, obviously, it has to understand its customer, their wants, needs, pain points, interests, and more. One way to do this is by crafting buyer personas. My question to you is, could you explain how buyer personas impact a brand and marketing strategy?
Look, I think the idea of personas, first of all, is not. There are many different interpretations of that concept of personas. This friend of mine, he's quite a very well read and well written design practitioner by name Steve Portugal, uh, based in the Bay Area. He wrote this or made this presentation a while back. This is probably 10 years back. I'm not sure, but his presentation was titled "Personas Are User-Centered Bullshit." um, and I found that quite interesting, because over time, what has happened is, this concept of personas has become quite abused in the design community, and people have started using, what they've started doing is they've started putting hypothetical characters and names to some persona, and imagining some thing that John does this and then he does that, and Mary does this and Mary does that, or whatever. you know, creating these fictional stories. um, that's not how personas should work, right? Hopefully that's not how anyone should be is practicing design. For me, personas are nothing but real stories. They are, people whom you real people whom you meet, and real consumers or end users of whatever it is that you're trying to solve, and really bringing out their stories alive through real actual stories, not fabricated or hypothetical stories. That really is what, to me, is the most important part of a persona. The second part is, of course, how do you abstract that, the stories, and segment them, or rather abstract them in such a way that you see patterns, right? um, and so how do you get to that level of abstraction in a way that you can start seeing some patterns emerge in how people behave? So that's the second part of it. But to me, the most important part is, how do you get to those stories of what real people are doing in their current scenario, and what's the journey they're going through, and really bringing that alive through real life stories.
Hey, did you know Fractal has consistently been rated as India's best company to work for by the Great Places to Work Institute? Fractal has also been featured as a leader in the Customer Analytics Service Providers Wave 2019 by Forrester Research, and recognized as an honorable vendor in the Magic Quadrant for Data and Analytics by Gartner. So my next one to you, Param, is usability is one of the most critical factors in the success of a website, but it often goes overlooked. It hurts your brand and it hurts your bottom line as well, 100% of the time. The question that I have is, what does the future of usability look like, and how can companies improve the usability of their websites?
Yeah, so I think, no doubts about the fact that usability it impacts, especially if you've done a bad job, right? And it can hurt your business. So on the positive, of course, if you do a great job of usability, or rather, if you do a great job of your product or service design, then the usability as an outcome is obviously going to be much better, and therefore will improve your business. So there's no questions about that. I think the way to think about it is, 10, 15, 20 years back, in the design world, this was thought of as, a special thing called usability testing, and usability process and all of that, which was given a lot of importance, and it was important, but I think it was done in the wrong way, in way back at that time. I think there was this notion that you would do these usability testing labs and things like that. And I'm talking, like, 15 years back, or 10 years back at least. And some people are still doing that. And I don't personally conform to that idea, because for me, the usability, experience is the usability is an outcome of the design process. If you've done a bad job of understanding unmet needs, and identifying the right pain points, or not done a good job of the actual solution design, thinking about the entire end-to-end experience of the product or service that you're creating, then the usability will be substandard. um, there's no point testing it at the fag end of it if you've not focused on the processes before that. So I think, to my mind, so that's one sort of ideological perspective I have. The other thing is that, doing these testing scenarios in a controlled environment in a lab is also something that I'm not. I've done that in the past, way back, maybe 10, 15 years back, but I feel that doesn't really have much merit, because what really helps is in context, in situ, or sort of real world testing. And so the closer you can get to putting your product or service or idea or whatever it is that you're testing into the hands of real users in the real environment, the better inputs you are likely to get in terms of what works, what doesn't. And so that's ideally how I think people should test and explore and iterate what they're building.
Interesting. In fact, that's quite a beautiful perspective in terms of how we could go out and check the usability aspect. In fact, Param, moving from there to the world of technology, and at a panel discussion of People Matter Tech HR 2019, you mentioned technology needs to be delightful. If it's not delightful, it will not be used. How do you ensure that technology is delightful?
Look, I think the world that we're living in now is such that technology has become as as pervasive as one. Probably more pervasive than we would like, but that's going to be the reality of the world, and it'll continue that way. If not, it's only going to get more and more. I think what everyone has begun to realize, or has already realized, I think, is that you can't differentiate just the technology part anymore, right? Technology itself will become commoditized sooner than later. What is a wow something in the beginning, like let's say drones, for example. Drones were a technological marvel some time back, and but now the concept of drones has become fairly commoditized, and you can literally buy a drone off Amazon or whatever, right? And you can get it across and use it in different contexts, whether it is for photography or something else. So the point I'm making is, therefore, where the differentiation is in the consumer delight, or in the end user delight. How do you think about applying that technology to a context and solving, coming up with a differentiation at a consumer need level? That's really what will differentiate, and therefore help you stand out. And therefore the technology is great, but you can't it's not sufficient. It's going to get commoditized sooner rather than later, and therefore to differentiate, you will really think of it from a end user perspective or a delight perspective. Ultimately, why people will use it and will continue to use it is when it's delightful. That was the whole idea.
That's exciting. In fact, while we talk about the world of technology, Param, artificial intelligence has become a very long way in short period. In fact, AI is now capable of automating tasks associated with both explicit knowledge that can be input as a number and words and tacit human knowledge. In many cases, newer forms of AI can perform such tasks more accurately than humans. The question that I have for you, Param, is how can human centered design make AI effective?
There are two, three ways of thinking about how design can make a difference in the world of AI. One is really looking at again, it goes back to the basic principles, right? It's about really looking at a problem from a human dimension perspective, right? And let me give an example in the context of AI, right? So let's say it's it could be something as simple as a vacuum cleaner that is automated, right? A robot that is going around the house and is vacuuming the house. Now in the old world, pre robot stage, the way we would use a vacuum cleaner is by our own hands and sort of go around manually doing it. There is feedback that you get in that process, right? You're actually looking at, you're using the device on your own, and you're getting physical, tactical, visual feedback, that the house is being cleaned, and involved in the process. But if the robot is going around the house and vacuuming the place on its own, what is the feedback that, as a user, that I'm getting, is something that I need to think about as a creator of that product or whatever, right? So that's an example, a small example, but it's an example of how the role of design comes into AI, which is, are you thinking about the human dimension of it? While the AI is, of course, going to help you in automating that process and simplifying it, and making it machine driven. But but you have to think about, how does the user want the feedback to come back to her or him? And um, and and I think that's one small role, right? So that's one small example. The other examples could be in thinking about the ethics of AI, right? It's about, which is, of course, a whole big different topic, and there are people who specialize in that. But I think where design can help there is, again, thinking about the needs of people, and how do you sort of create some level of fairness and equality, and a certain, removing some of the biases that could exist in the AI, right? So when you're thinking about not the technology but the end user, or people who are going to be coming in contact with it, then how does that work, right? So that's, I mean, in the same example of the robot that I was talking about, are there any biases that could be coming in the way that the product is going to be used? And so those are some things that we can think about, and the design process can really help in debiasing and get into some of those core elements of ethics. Um, the other is, of course, the simplification of the way the product is experienced, right? While the feature can be there, but how do you use that feature and how do you make it more simple and delightful is really where design can come in. So, for example, again, the robot example, the vacuum robot example, it could be that, can the machine learn that the house needs to be vacuumed, every few days in a particular pattern, right? What if you have to vacuum it? What if you have to clean the house every second day? Then that makes it more efficient, and it's faster to clean the house every time after that. And if that sort of message can be given to the user, and the user suddenly, he or she didn't even know that if the house were vacuumed every second day as opposed to every fourth day, then it's better, and that improves the outcomes. Those are small things, right? I mean, the human being doesn't realize these things, but the machine can learn it, can sort of proactively suggest or nudge the user into that. And I mean, that's just an example, but the point is, how do you delight the user and consumer in solving needs that they didn't realize that they had? I think that there's great opportunity there. I mean, in so many ways, in the way that design and AI could come together.
That's quite well expressed, Param. And that brings us to our last question. At Avantika University, we've coined the term designeering, which is the blended approach of design and engineering. And we see huge possibilities in the collaboration between these two fields. The question that I have for you is, do you find it relevant, and how is designeering helping you in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely relevant, and I would say it's pretty much table stakes. It is something that everyone should be thinking about, and coincidentally, at Fractal we have something similar, which is the whole idea of AI design and engineering coming together. That is going to be the secret sauce for people to transform the way problems are solved as we go forward into the world. So I think it definitely resonates, and I think from a design standpoint, why it's relevant is because, as someone, I think the CEO of IBM or someone else way back, I'm talking 20, 30, 40 years back, they said this, that design is too important to be left to designers. And so I think the world of design, engineering, AI, business, all these worlds are coming together, and it's not enough if you're thinking only about design. You have to think about how does design come together with engineering or with AI or with business, and only then can you create real impact.
Thank you, Param. This was really exciting conversation. It was a pleasure hosting you on our show, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to have a lot of learning from this conversation. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you to the Avantika team for inviting me, and look forward to being in touch. Thank you.
Hey there, we hope you enjoyed our show. Do write to us on ads@avantika.edu.in. We look forward to your opinions, feedbacks, and suggestions of speakers you would like us to host on this show. Do tune in our channel next week on Wednesday for a new story on Hubhopper or wherever you get your podcast from. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.